Welcome to Equip, Build, and Mature. Thank you guys for coming back. Hope you're having a great day. As I like to do on Saturdays, I want to look in each book of the Bible and see what we can see about Jesus. So today we're going to be looking in the book of Numbers. In the book of Numbers, Jesus is revealed through reflective types, prophecies, and foreshadowing. Now, based on New Testament teachings, Jesus' covenant disciples developed an understanding that connects several specific events and symbols in Numbers directly to the person and work of Jesus. So we're going to notice a few of these. First is the bronze serpent in Numbers 21, verses 4 to 9. Now this narrative is telling us about when the Hebrews were dying from fiery snake bites or poisonous snake bites. God told Moses to lift up a bronze serpent on a pole so anyone who looked at it would live. In the Gospel of John, chapter 3, verses 14 to 15, the Apostle John records that Jesus clearly connected the bronze serpent to his own crucifixion. Jesus said that he must be lifted up so that whoever believes in him might have eternal life. Second, the star and the scepter. Numbers chapter 24, verse 17. This is the narrative. Balaam was a pagan false prophet, driven by greed. King Balak of Moab paid Balaam to curse the Hebrews for money. So God stopped Balaam from cursing Israel and forced him to bless them instead. Well, this pagan prophet spoke 7 prophetic oracles recorded in chapters 23 and 24 of Numbers. In the 4th oracle, Numbers 24, 15 to 19, his prophecy featured a star and a scepter that were going to be rising out of Israel. And this is understood as a prophecy of God's future Messiah, Jesus. It directly points to Jesus being an eternal king. Third, Joshua, the military leader, in Numbers 27. And this is what it says in Numbers 27, verses 18 to 20. The Lord replied to Moses, "Take Joshua, son of Nun, a man who has the Spirit in him, and lay your hands on him. Have him stand before the priest Eleazar and the whole community, and commission him in their sight. Confer some of your authority on him, so that the entire Israelite community will obey him." Now, Yeshua was God's replacement for Moses. He ultimately led the Hebrews into the promised land. Joshua is the exact same Hebrew name as Jesus, Yeshua. As Jesus' disciples, we look back to Joshua and we see how he led God's covenant people into the promised land. And that is a very clear foreshadowing of how Jesus leads God's covenant people into eternal rest in God's presence. Fourth, we see in Numbers the camp formation. We see this in Numbers chapter 2. As the 12 tribes of Israel traveled through the wilderness for 40 years, they were arranged in a strict sacred layout centered around the tabernacle where God's presence dwelled among his covenant people. The 12, that's a cat, not a person. The 12 tribes formed an outer boundary, arranged into 4 primary divisions of 3 tribes each. They were facing north, east, south, and west. As the tribes camped and traveled, they formed the shape of a cross when they were in the wilderness. And fifth, water came from a rock 2 times in the Torah. First, we see it in Exodus chapter 17, verses 1 through 7, at Rephidim. And second, we see it later in Numbers chapter 20, verses 1 to 13 at Kadesh. When read together, these two events create a detailed prophetic timeline of the life, death, and ongoing work of Jesus. First, the struck rock. Jesus was crucified once. The first event is in Exodus chapter 17. And the Hebrews complained of thirst. And God told Moses, we see this in chapter 17 of Exodus verse 6, I'm going to stand there in front of you on the rock at Horeb. When you hit the rock, water will come out of it, and the people will drink. Later, in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 4, the Apostle Paul, he taught that this rock was a physical foreshadowing of the spiritual drink that Jesus would provide. Jesus' presence continually accompanied the Hebrews to sustain them while they traveled through the wilderness. Now it's interesting in that verse in Exodus 17, God standing on the rock. That meant that he aligned himself with Jesus. Moses striking the rock with the rod of judgment represents God's judgment, striking Jesus on the cross. The physical striking produced literal water to save Israel from physical death. Striking the rock foreshadowed Jesus' death on the cross to provide spiritual salvation to those who would covenant with him at their second birth. Now, secondly, the spoken to rock is Jesus resurrected. The second event is in Numbers chapter 20, verses 10 to 13. Decades later, a new generation of Israelites were desperately thirsty. This time, what God told Moses was crucially different. He says in Numbers chapter 20, verse 8, you and your brother Aaron are to speak to the rock while they watch, and it will yield its water. Now this foreshadowed that Jesus only needed to be struck or crucified once for all time. We see this in Hebrews chapter 7, verse 27. He does not need to be crucified again. Because the work of the cross is finished, Jesus' covenant disciples today do not need to strike him or do not need to crucify him. We only need to obediently respond to him in faith, to receive his grace, and to receive the spiritual refreshment that only Jesus can provide. Guys, thanks for taking a few moments here. Hope it helps you to see a little bit more clearly Jesus in the book of Numbers, and may God continue to bless us as we stay focused on him every day of our lives. You guys take care.